everyone. So with Halloween coming, we started thinking about the Halloween spirit, and we decided to go into our vault and really look into the Trout Gallery's collection and see if there are any objects that really represent the Halloween spirit. And surprisingly, we found a lot of objects that really represented Halloween, and it was really hard to choose a couple. But for example, on the next slide, we can see an English satirical print, which is just really represents my worst nightmare. There are a lot of really weird creatures with many heads and wings. So definitely really hard to tell what's going on, but very Halloween. And then in the next slide, we can see the skeleton, which really freaks me out. But George Rouault created this as part of his series, The Horrors of War. And then in the next slide, at first I had a really hard time realizing what this actually is, but this artist created this print as a series of his human anatomy prints, and it just shows a forearm split open, and we can see all the different muscles and tendons. But as we were going through all of these objects, we were really interested in seeing if we had any witches or ghosts in the objects that we have in the Trout Gallery collection. And we ended up deciding to do this talk on ghost stories in art. So now I'll turn to my colleague Halima.
Thank you, Ana-Elena. That photo of the tendons of the arm freaks me out too. It didn't even look like an arm when I saw it at first. Anyways, Bianca, you can go to the next slide, please. So what I'm showing you here are 3 prints from the Trout collection that all depict the same story. It's a story about a witch and a ghost or a soul, depending on how you read or interpret the story. One of the things that was interesting to us about the story is that it's actually from the Old Testament, and it continues to make certain appearances in pop culture. It's the story of the Witch of Endor. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but according to the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, the Witch of Endor possessed an unusual power. She owned a talisman with which she could summon the dead. At the request of King Saul of Israel, she called up the ghost of the recently deceased prophet Samuel, despite the fact that the king himself had previously forbidden the practices of communicating with the dead and magic. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to read you the story as told in the book of Samuel, and you're going to vote on which artist tells the story best based on the ABC prints that you see here. Bianca will switch between the slides so you can get a better look at it. While I'm reading, obviously she'll toggle through the slides, you'll see the images, and then you can have a better look at them. And then when I'm done, we'll release a poll, and then you guys can vote on which image told the story the best. Okay, here's the story. Here we go. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had lamented over him and had buried him in Ramah, his hometown. In the meantime, Saul had removed the mediums and magicians from the land. The Philistines assembled. They came and camped at Shunem. Saul mustered all Israel and camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was absolutely terrified. So Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, not by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets. So Saul instructed his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so that I may go to her and inquire of her." His servants replied to him, "There is a woman who is a medium in Endor." So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothing and left, accompanied by 2 of his men. They came to the woman at night and said, "Use your ritual pit to conjure up for me the one I tell you." But the woman said to him, "Look, you are aware of what Saul has done. He has removed the mediums and magicians from the land. Why are you trapping me so you can put me to death?" But Samuel swore on oath to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not incur guilt in this matter." The woman replied, "Who is that I should bring up for you?" He said, "Bring up for me Samuel." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out loudly. The woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. But what have you seen?" The woman replied to Saul, "I have seen a divine being coming up from the ground." He said to her, "What about his appearance?" She said, "An old man is coming up. He is wrapped in a robe." Then Saul realized it was Samuel, and he bowed his face toward the ground and kneeled down. So that's the story. I should also probably mention that Saul doesn't get any advice about how to beat the Philistines after all that. Apparently, you shouldn't draw up spirits from the dead, it's frowned upon. Now, Bianca's going to release a poll, which should pop up on your screen. Hopefully, you were able to get a good look of all the prints. You'll have the option to vote for image A, B, or C, as shown here on the slide. Yeah.
Can you all see the, oh, okay, now can you see the results?
Okay. It looks like, oh, and I just got the registrar email about classes at Dickinson. Anyways, it looks like image B is the one that won, which I'm not surprised. Actually, that's the one that I thought was the one that told the story best, but thank you guys. That's interesting. I'm going to turn it back to Ana-Elena now.
Thanks, Halima. So once we found this ghost story, we were really curious to see if there were any other images that included ghosts. So Bianca, could you switch to the next slide? So we found this object, and it's a really interesting print with a group of men. And then if you see where the arrow is pointing, there's a ghostly figure to the right. And we don't really know what's going on in this image. All we have is the title saying a ghost appearing to 5 men. So it definitely looks like this image needs a story. So we're gonna give it 1. So I would like you to take out a piece of paper and a writing utensil, and please pretend that this is the middle scene of a story. So there's something going on before it, and then there's a scene after it. So in total, 3 scenes, and this is the middle one. So you're gonna have 2 minutes to make up a story. It could be anything you want. And again, this image would be the middle scene. Just to confirm that, again, this image is the middle scene, and you can use any details in this image to guide you in deciding what happened before or after. want to share their imagined story. Oh, so you can type it into the chat if that's easier, or just feel free to share. Halima, do you want to share your story?
Oh, great. Since none of you guys volunteered, I get to go. Yeah, actually, the first time that I saw this image, before I knew the title of it, was during our trout orientation week. And so Heather showed us this image. And before seeing, the title or knowing any of the context, to me, the first thing that I thought of when I saw the little ghost guy in the background was a zombie. So I think of this as kind of like, it seems like an old kind of like these guys are on an expedition. So like, if this is the middle slide, then before this, the townspeople had a meeting and they were like, okay, we have this problem. There is going to be a zombie apocalypse. What do we do? And these four guys, I don't know, maybe they're really dysfunctional together. They don't work very well together. They're very goofy, but they volunteer to go look for the zombies and kill them or something like that. So that's the first slide. And then this slide is them obviously exhausted, maybe arguing about where they should go next. And then they see this zombie in the background that's walking towards them. So that's the middle slide. And then the last slide maybe is some sort of a fight between them and the zombie, or maybe more zombies show up. I don't know. That's what I imagined from my story.
Yeah, thanks, Halima. Also, we have another story by Lev in the chat. So in the first image, these 5 men dump the body of an accidentally slain fellow hunter. And in the third image, they're recovering the body. So really interesting stories. Thank you. Does anyone else want to go?
Ana-Elena, do you want to share yours since Halima had to go?
Yeah, sure. So I was also thinking something about hunting. So in the first scene, these men were hunting, and then obviously in the middle scene, they see this ghost. So in my third scene, they just ran away after seeing this ghost.
Okay. Well, if nobody has any other stories, then we can move on to the next slide. This is actually my favorite part of, the objects that we found in the collection that kind of relate to spooky season and Halloween. We actually have more time, so we have time to actually talk a little bit more about this guy. This is obviously from the Trout collection. It's called a netsuke. I don't know if you guys have heard of what that is, but it's basically a little counterweight that's tied to the belt of kimonos to keep them tied. And, netsukes come in all kinds of beautifully carved designs featuring animals or objects. In this case, it's a little skeleton guy. And no one is actually sure what this one actually represents. We're pretty sure it's a reference to some kind of a moral tale. So I guess my question is, what do you suppose the lesson is that we're supposed to learn here from this guy? Obviously, there's a skeleton with a bucket and there's a hole in the bucket, and gushing out of it is water. And he's got one hand in his mouth and the other one is holding some kind of a stick, suggesting he's stirring liquid in the bucket or something. So what do you think that means? Obviously, there's a lot of symbolism there. You can interpret it how you will. What do you think the moral is that we're supposed to learn from this skeleton, this netsuke? Does anyone have any ideas? You can type it in the chat also if you don't want to speak out loud. Okay, Nicholas Bradbury says, always eat your fruits and veggies. That's the lesson that we're supposed to learn from this netsuke. Thank you, Nick. Anyone else?
Halima, I was just gonna say it's interesting that you just mentioned the hole in the barrel, because I feel like I've been staring at this piece for a while now, for a few weeks, and I just noticed the water coming out of the bucket. Like I'm always so fixated on this little guy's face.
His
Like,
grin, his
sleep
little
by-
grin.
yeah.
Someone else in the chat has said, hold on one second. The water of life does not avail the dead. That's a good one. And also don't take life work too seriously because it'll end one day. Oh, that's a little dark. Yeah. These are all really good. I think these are all plausible morals that we could learn from him. Also, I'm wondering, like, his hand is in his mouth. So I'm wondering if he's like, to me, that looks like he's biting his nails or like biting his fingers. But when Heather was showing us this image, she said it looked like he was eating something. So I wonder, I don't know, what do you guys think about that? But that's kind of interesting. Ana-Elena, what do you think the moral is here?
I'm not sure. I really like this object though. I was also thinking about eating because of what Heather said, but also the stirring of the water. And then I guess it's interesting that there's a hole, but maybe don't overthink things.
Yeah, I think it's his grin that's most ominous. I don't know. We've got another response in the chat. Nick says maybe gluttony, that overconsumption will lead to some sort of demise as well. I think that could be true. And maybe the whole is just like, you know, letting go of some of that, whatever it is that you possess, to be less selfless or something. I don't know. And then Sebastian says, I get a sense of mischief from the skeleton. IDK. I do too. Yeah, it seems like he knows something that we don't know. But yeah, super creepy. Any last minute, oh, here's another. The thing he's holding looks like a water dipper. If he lifted the water to his mouth, it would flow out of him just as it's flowing out of the barrel. That's a really interesting observation to make. Also, you know, keeping in mind that he's a skeleton. He doesn't have any skin or organs that can keep anything inside of him. We're also assuming it's a him. And it's a skeleton, and we don't actually know. But, you know, being a skeleton, you know, there's nothing to keep water inside of you. So, you know, that's a good observation. Yeah.
There's also an addition to that comment, talking about how challenging this would be to carve.
Yeah.
And what is it, an inch?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 2 inches tall.
Yeah.
I think when you look at this image, you don't necessarily realize the scale that it's at also. So it's impressive to think about the actual artistry of the object as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's very detailed for something that's so small, right?
Cool. Are there any other last minute thoughts that you guys have? Okay, I'm gonna stop share. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Halima and Ana-Elena, for leading this little Halloween look at the Trout Gallery's collection. I hope that you guys all have a safe Halloween. Hopefully you guys can do something or get into the mood with watching some scary movies. Like I said, we have our last big event of this semester next Thursday with artist Steve Prince, and then we will have a final Trout Unmute later on in December, like December 3rd. So hopefully you guys can come back and join us again, and I hope that we will see you in person very soon. So thank you guys so much. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.